Hello, in this video I'm going to take you through what a mapping file is and how to configure it for Applicator Kit for Modo. For those who don't know, Applicator Kit for Modo allows you to apply Apple's ARKit Face Tracking data from your iPhone or your iPad to your characters in Modo. So let's get into it. So this is what a mapping file looks like. It's just a CSV. If you have Excel, it can open up with Excel, but any spreadsheeting application can open a CSV, no problem. So down the left here we have the type of attribute that the iPhone can capture. So most of it's blend shape, there's 52 in total, and then at the bottom there's items. Now if you're using the live-link face from Unreal Engine, that does not capture the eye rolls and movement, so it's only captures the head, but you can use that data to apply to your character. So we'll go through it. So the first column basically says is it a blend shape or an item, and the second column is what is the data attribute that we bring in. So as you can see, there's, oops, don't want to change that, there's cheek squint left, cheek squint right, and there's a whole heap of them. And if you look into the description, I'll have a link to Apple's developer documentation so you can see exactly what each of these items mean. Now when it comes to items, the heads, eyes, well, there's heads and eyes, it's got the three, the typical XYZ, but it's recorded as yaw, pitch and roll. So yaw's typically Y, pitch is X, and roll is Z. Obviously it may change depending on how your character is set up, on which one, what axis you had pointing up, but that should be a good bearer, and as you trial and error, we'll quickly sort that out. Now the next column, the target, is the one where you specify what is that piece of data going to be applied to in our scene. So if I jump back into Modo, here is my character. Now I've imported this character as a reference, so what you'll see is it's got the name of here's my morph map group on the right hand side here. You can see it's got the name of the morph map plus, or the morph target, plus a space and the name of the scene. But we have to use the whole lot. So if I was to target jaw L, I need to grab that whole name with the brackets and apply and put that in my mapping file. And so if you look for this mapping file, this is the mapping file I've defined based on my character to apply the data to. I don't have a morph target for each of these attributes, so the ones I don't have I leave blank. Now you'll see there's an enabled column. If it's blank and enabled Y, it's not going to do anything because it's got nothing to apply it to, so you can just ignore that one. But I've got some extra stuff here too. What you can see is that for the eye squint right, I've got eye squint R, open brackets, old man, and then I've got a pipe, which is the shift backslash depending on your keyboard, typically above the enter. It's this one, just the piping, and that way. And then I also have lash eye squint R, old man. That means this one attribute that I'm getting out of my data is being applied to two different morph targets. If I jump back into my Modo file here, go into my meshes, I've got a body, but I also have an eyelash shape, because in the tool that I used to put it together, it had the eyelash in the different mesh. But they both have the same morph map defined, and if you drive them with the same value, they follow each other correctly. But instead of applying it twice to your scene, you can use a pipe and put as many as you want. And as I go through my file, there's actually a few different ones where that applies. But what you do, you keep going through the file, put your morph map that targets to in the target field for all the different data attributes that we capture. And now when it comes to items, you think of your head, you usually have a locator that drives the direction, but it could also be the mesh itself. But you have to say the yaw is going to Y, the head pitch is going to X, the head roll is going to Z. Now that is the convention we use here is basically the name of the locator or mesh item dot and which axis. So as you can see, head old man dot y is for the head yaw, and when that finds that that match in the file in your scene, it will apply that data attribute across. The next one is pretty straightforward. It's enabled, so I use a y for yes, n for no type convention to say if I'm going to apply this data. So what this allows you to do is to select which ones that you don't want to apply to for certain circumstances. I find it useful for the head. I find you can get a little bit of wobble, and sometimes you want the head to be applied, sometimes you don't. You can always come in and go no. Doesn't matter if it's capital or lowercase. All of them apply. All of them work just as well. But let's pop it in. I've got my caps lock on. There we go. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. The next one is multiplier. What multiplier does is grabs the base value, the value that it comes in, and times it up by whatever number that you do. So if we look at these morph targets, in Modo it's represented as a percentage, usually typically from 0 to 100%. But in the data file it's a percentage as a number, so that means if it's 50% it's 0.5. So what the multiplier does is takes that number and just multiplies it by 0.5. It allows for characters where the morph target is fairly subtle to really extenuate. So like I do it for the mouth, the jaw open, which maps to my mouth open. I times it by 2 so I can get a really bigger, more movement in the mouth. But I've also got some weird stuff. So the way this model works is eye squint and eye wide are opposites. So the squint would close the eyelid, the eye slightly, while wide goes in the opposite direction, makes it slightly wider. But it's the same morph target. But what I can do, I define the same morph target in these two, but no problem. But multiplier for eye squint is just 1, so it means as the number comes in. But for eye wide, I times it by -1 and does the inverse of a squint. And so I can do stuff like that to my files. I can also do times 0.5, which makes it a little bit more subtle, not so extreme, and items like that. And that's multiply. It's just straight out maths. It won't. It does go. So if I do times 2, when the data comes in, it will show up as 200%. If it was a full strength 1, so 1 will show up as 200%, which Modo is more than happy with. Then we have value shift. Value shift is like multiplier, where it's doing something to the source that values, but it is adding or subtracting a constant value. So if it comes in, if I had set this one up as 0.2, so if the value came in as 0, it will apply 0.2. If it came in as 0.5, it will apply 0.7. So it's constantly adding 0.2, and the inverse is true. So if I did negative 0.2, it will take away 0.2. Now for the morph, for the blend shapes and the morph targets, it doesn't really make sense. But where it does make sense is when you got the head. Now when you're holding your phone, that pitch tends to come in a little bit weird. So if I didn't have this feature, you might have the head just tucked right down into the chest, and it looks like the character's talking to the ground. So what I got here is I do a shift by negative 0.3, and it lifts the head up, so it's looking straight. That was close enough for my liking for that scene. So that gives me a much better performance when I apply it to my character, and I don't have to go in and modify that manually later or mess around with in the dope sheet and so forth. And then we have the last option is smooth. So smoothing works. It uses a 7-frame averaging algorithm. So if I have 7 numbers, let's do oops, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.1, 0.2, oops, 0.3, 0.3 again, and then 0.2. What it will do, it will take the 7 frames and average them numbers. So it will take the 3 frames before and 3 frames after, and it'll average those numbers to smooth out any imperfections. And as it moves, or any popping in the values that the iPhone picks up. So as it moves along, it's constantly averaging based on those numbers. Now you don't have to apply it, it's totally up to you, or you can have 2 files, one with smoothing on, one with smoothing off, so you can compare the results. But it's same sort of deal. It's a Y or an N. If I just want to take it off, I can just quickly push that down N and save my file. And now I don't apply the smoothing algorithm. But that's the mapping file in a nutshell. The main part is to say these values that we get out of the iPhone's tracking, apply it to these targets. So mostly all the blend shapes target becomes a morph group or morph target, and for the items at the bottom, it's an item, and they'll be typically either a locator or a mesh. Thank you for watching. I hope that gives you a bit better understanding of what the mapping file is and how to configure it, and happy applicating.